Elara didn't know that the man watching her from the high table was the Alpha King of the Northern Realm. She didn't know that his golden eyes had been tracking her every movement for the past hour, or that every wolf in the great hall could scent the power rolling off him in waves. And she certainly didn't know that when she stumbled through the gilded doors of the Royal Autumn Ball, wine-stained and trembling, she had just walked into the arms of her destiny. All she knew was that Lady Morgana's crystal goblet had somehow found its way to the marble floor in 1,000 glittering pieces, and now the noblewoman's wine was dripping from Elara's borrowed servant dress like drops of blood. "Clumsy little mouse," Lady Morgana drawled, her voice carrying across the nearby tables. "Perhaps you should return to the kitchens where you belong." The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel, cutting through the gentle melody of the string quartet. Heat flooded Elara's cheeks as she knelt to gather the broken crystal, her fingers shaking. She had been invisible for 22 years, moving through the castle like a ghost, cleaning and serving and never being seen. Tonight, in her desperate attempt to blend in among the servants attending the ball, she had made herself spectacularly visible. "I'm sorry, my lady," she whispered, not daring to look up. "I'll fetch another." "Don't bother." Lady Morgana's silk slipper kicked a shard across the floor. "The damage is done, though I suppose we can hardly expect grace from someone who doesn't know her place." The wine had soaked through the thin fabric of Elara's dress, a cast-off from one of the kitchen maids that she had altered to fit her smaller frame. The deep burgundy stain spread across the cream-coloured silk like a wound, and she pressed her lips together to keep from crying. She couldn't afford to replace this dress. She couldn't afford anything. More laughter rippled through the nearby nobles, and Elara felt something crack inside her chest. Not break. She was too used to this for breaking. Just crack, like ice on a winter pond, letting the cold seep in. She gathered the last of the crystal and rose on unsteady legs, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. The sooner she could escape back to the servants' quarters, the better. But as she turned toward the service entrance, her foot caught in the hem of the too long dress. Time seemed to slow as she stumbled forward, her hands still full of broken glass. The main ballroom doors loomed ahead, thrown wide to reveal the glittering spectacle beyond. She was going to fall. She was going to crash through those doors like some ridiculous scene from a children's story, and then she would truly have nowhere to hide. Strong hands caught her shoulders before she could fall. The broken crystals scattered across the marble as her palms flew out to steady herself, and suddenly she was looking up into eyes the colour of liquid amber, golden eyes that seemed to catch and hold the light from the chandeliers, warm and intent and focused entirely on her. The man holding her was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his black formal jacket fitted to broad shoulders that spoke of strength rather than softness. Everything about him radiated power and control, from the sharp line of his jaw to the way he held himself with absolute certainty. But it was the way he was looking at her that made her breath catch, not through her, the way everyone else did, at her, like she was something worth seeing. "Are you hurt?" His voice was deep, roughened with something that sent warmth spiralling through her chest. She shook her head, suddenly aware that his hands were still on her shoulders, that they were standing in full view of the ballroom entrance, that someone like him should not be touching someone like her. "I'm fine. I'm sorry. You should dance." The words fell between them like stones dropped in still water, sending ripples of shock through the watching crowd. Because there was a crowd now, Elara realized dimly. Nobles had turned from their conversations to stare, their faces reflecting various degrees of confusion and intrigue. "I don't—" she started, but he was already stepping back, extending his hand with the fluid grace of someone born to command. "One dance," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her think of honey and whiskey and dangerous things that tasted too good to resist. "That's all I'm asking." She should say no. She should curtsy and apologize and disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. She was wearing a stained servant's dress and slippers with holes in the soles, and she had never learned to dance properly. She was nobody, nothing. But something in her chest pulled tight when she looked at his outstretched hand, a golden thread she couldn't see but could somehow feel, connecting her heart to something vast and warm and absolutely certain. "Just one dance," she whispered, and placed her hand in his. The smile that spread across his face was devastating in its intensity, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made her forget how to breathe. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, and suddenly the whispers from the crowd seemed to fade into the background. "Just one dance," he agreed, but there was a promise in his golden eyes that suggested he had no intention of stopping there. He led her onto the dance floor as the string quartet struck up a new waltz, and Ilara felt the weight of every gaze in the ballroom settling on her shoulders like a physical thing. Lords and ladies who had never looked at her twice were now studying her with the intensity of scholars examining a particularly puzzling text. But all of that faded when he placed his hand at her waist and drew her into the first steps of the dance. The world narrowed to the space between them, to the warmth of his touch and the way he moved with unconscious grace, leading her through steps she somehow knew despite never learning them. "What's your name?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear as they turned. "Ilara." The words slipped out before she could think better of it. "Ilara." He repeated it like he was tasting something sweet. "I'm—" "Your Majesty," a voice interrupted from the edge of the dance floor. "Forgive the intrusion." Everything inside Ilara went cold. "Your Majesty." The man holding her, the one whose touch sent fire racing through her veins, whose golden eyes had looked at her like she was precious. He was the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, the one whose very presence could make grown men tremble. And she was a servant girl with wine stains on her borrowed dress, dancing with him in front of his entire court. She tried to pull away, panic clawing at her throat, but his grip tightened just enough to keep her close. "Not now," he said without taking his eyes off her face. His voice carried the unmistakable weight of absolute authority, and she heard footsteps retreating quickly. "I have to go," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't—" "You're exactly where you should be." His hand at her waist pressed gently, keeping her moving in the rhythm of the waltz. "Stay with me, Ilara." The way he said her name made something flutter wildly in her chest, but fear was stronger than whatever strange pull she felt toward him. "You don't understand. I'm just a servant. I clean floors and empty chamber pots, and I shouldn't even be in this room, let alone dancing with your king." There was something almost amused in his voice, but his eyes were intense, searching. "And yet, here you are." The music swelled around them, and for a moment Ilara let herself imagine that this was real, that she belonged in his arms, that the golden thread pulling in her chest meant something more than a brief moment of impossible kindness, that a girl who had spent her entire life invisible could somehow become visible to the one person who mattered most. But the song was ending, and reality was creeping back in like shadows at sunset. Soon he would remember who he was and who she was, and this moment would become nothing more than a strange story the court would whisper about for weeks before forgetting entirely. The final notes of the waltz hung in the air, but he didn't step away. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles, his golden eyes never leaving hers. "Just one dance?" she had asked. His smile was slow and certain and full of promises that made her heart race. "Every dance," he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden silence of the ballroom, "for the rest of your life." The ballroom fell into a silence so complete that Ilara could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Every face in the glittering crowd had turned toward them, a sea of shocked expressions and gaping mouths that made her stomach clench with terror. He had just promised her every dance for the rest of her life, in front of his entire court. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp with barely concealed outrage. "Perhaps you would care to explain—" "I would not." The Alpha King's voice was conversational, almost pleasant, but something in it made the Lord step back immediately. His golden eyes never left Ilara's face, and his hand at her waist tightened possessively. "The musicians seem to have stopped. Shall we remedy that?" He lifted his free hand, and instantly the string quartet launched into another waltz, the melody trembling slightly, as if the musicians themselves were nervous. The court remained frozen, watching, but he began to move again, leading Ilara through the steps with effortless grace. "Breathe," he murmured, and she realized she had been holding her breath. "You're safe." Safe. The word was foreign on her tongue, a concept she had never truly understood. But when he said it, something in her chest loosened, just enough to let air into her lungs. "They're all staring," she whispered, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes tracking their every movement. Some faces showed curiosity, others disapproval, but all of them held the sharp focus of predators scenting blood in the water. Let them stare. His voice was warm, amused even, as if the scandalized expressions of his nobles entertained him. "They're seeing something they've never witnessed before." "What's that?" "Their king choosing his queen." The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing what little breath she had managed to regain. Queen. He couldn't mean. She was nobody, nothing, a servant girl who emptied chamber pots and scrubbed floors. Queens were born to thrones, raised in silk and educated in languages she couldn't even pronounce. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice barely audible above the music. "You can't mean that." "Can't I?" He spun her gently, and when she came back into his arms, his golden eyes were burning with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Tell me something, Ilara. What do you feel when I touch you?" Heat, fire racing through her veins like liquid gold, pooling low in her belly and spreading outward until every nerve ending sang with awareness. The golden thread in her chest pulled taut, connecting her to something vast and powerful and absolutely certain. But she couldn't say that, couldn't admit that his touch made her feel more alive than she had ever been, that looking into his eyes was like coming home to a place she had never known existed. "I don't know what you mean," she lied. His smile was knowing, devastatingly handsome and full of patience. "You feel it, the pull, the recognition. Your wolf knows, even if you haven't learned to listen to her yet." Wolf. The word sent a chill down her spine, even as something deep inside her stirred in response. She had always been told she was wolfless, broken, less than whole. But sometimes, in the dark hours before dawn, she felt something restless moving beneath her skin, something wild and fierce that she kept carefully locked away. "I don't have a wolf," she whispered, the same lie she had been telling for 22 years. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, and she caught his scent, pine and snow and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse race. Liar. The single word was said so softly, with such gentle certainty, that it cut deeper than any accusation. Because he was right. She was lying, had been lying for so long that she almost believed it herself. "Lady Morgana is watching us like she wants to set us both on fire," he said conversationally, changing the subject so smoothly that it took her a moment to follow. "Lord Blackwood looks like he swallowed something particularly unpleasant, and the young Duke of Westmere appears to be calculating whether challenging me to a duel would be worth the certain death that would follow." Despite everything, Ilara found herself fighting a smile. "You're enjoying this?" "Immensely." His grin was boyish and entirely too attractive. I've been attending these insufferable gatherings for 15 years, watching the same people have the same conversations while they try to marry their daughters off to me. This is the first time one has been interesting. Because you're scandalizing them all by dancing with a servant. Because I'm dancing with my mate. There it was again, that word that made her heart stutter and her breath catch. Mate. In the wolf world it meant everything. Destiny, forever, the other half of one's soul. It meant a bond that couldn't be broken, a love that transcended death itself. It meant impossible things for a girl like her. "You don't know me," she said desperately. "I could be anyone. I could be terrible." "You could be." He considered this seriously, as if it were a real possibility, rather than the desperate protest of a woman trying to save him from making a colossal mistake. "Are you terrible, Ilara?" The question caught her off guard. Was she terrible? She tried to think of something, anything that would prove her point. "I broke Lady Morgana's crystal goblet." Scandalous. "I've never learned proper etiquette. I don't know which fork to use for fish or how to curtsy to a duchess." Irrelevant. "I can't read anything more complicated than kitchen lists, and I've never been to finishing school or Ilara." He stopped moving, and suddenly they were standing still in the centre of the dance floor while the music continued around them. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. "Do you help people when they're in need, even when it costs you something?" She blinked, confused by the question. "Of course, but—" "Do you hurt others to make yourself feel better? Do you lie for personal gain or take pleasure in causing pain?" "No, never. I would never—" "Then you are not terrible." His voice was absolute, final. "You are exactly what I have been waiting for." The music swelled around them, and for a moment the crowd seemed to fade away entirely. There was only him, only the warmth of his hands on her face, and the golden fire in his eyes, and the impossible certainty in his voice that made her want to believe in fairy tales. But fairy tales weren't real, and servant girls didn't become queens, and she was about to shatter this beautiful moment with the weight of reality. "The song is ending," she whispered, because it was, the final notes beginning to drift through the air like autumn leaves falling. "So it is." He didn't step away, didn't remove his hands from her face. Instead, he leaned down until his forehead touched hers, until she could count the golden flecks in his amber eyes. "What did you ask for tonight, Ilara?" Her throat felt tight, emotion clogging her voice. "Just one dance." "And what did I promise you?" The words stuck in her throat, too precious and too impossible to speak aloud. But he was waiting, patient and certain and absolutely immovable, and finally she whispered the truth that would change everything. "Every dance, for the rest of my life." His smile was radiant, transforming his face into something that belonged in paintings and poems and legends. "Then we should probably have another dance, don't you think?" He lifted his hand again, and the musicians launched into a new waltz without missing a beat. The court murmured and whispered among themselves, but no one dared to interrupt as he drew her back into his arms. "What happens now?" she asked as they began to move again, her voice small in the vastness of the ballroom. "Now," he said, spinning her until her borrowed skirts flared out around her like flower petals. "We dance, and tomorrow we begin the rest of forever." The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, and for the first time in her life, Ilara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could be real after all. The days that followed the ball were a whirlwind of confusion and wonder that left Ilara feeling like she was living someone else's life. She had tried to return to the servants' quarters that night, desperate to hide away and pretend that dancing with the Alpha King had been nothing more than a beautiful dream. But the royal guards had intercepted her before she could reach the familiar stone corridors that had been her home for 22 years. "His Majesty requests your presence in the East Wing," the captain had said, his tone respectful in a way that no one had ever used with her before. "Your rooms have been prepared." rooms, plural, as if she were someone worthy of space, of comfort, of consideration. The chambers they led her to were larger than the entire servants' hall, with windows that looked out over the royal gardens and furniture that gleamed with polish and care. A fire crackled warmly in the marble fireplace, and laid across the massive four-poster bed was a gown of deep blue silk that probably cost more than she had ever earned in her entire life. She had stood in the doorway for a full 10 minutes, certain that there had been some mistake, that any moment someone would come to collect her and return her to her proper place below stairs. But no one came, and eventually exhaustion won over disbelief, and she had fallen asleep in the softest bed she had ever touched. 3 days had passed since then, and still she felt like an imposter. "You're not eating," said a gentle voice from across the table, and Ilara looked up to find King Adrian watching her with those devastating golden eyes. He had insisted she call him by his name, though every instinct she possessed screamed that it was inappropriate, dangerous, impossible. They were taking breakfast in his private study, a cosy room lined with books and warmed by another fireplace. The table was set with delicate china and crystal that caught the morning light, and there was enough food spread across its surface to feed half the kitchen staff. But despite the care that had obviously gone into the meal, Ilara could barely manage more than a few bites. "I'm not very hungry," she said, which was a lie. She was always hungry these days, but not for food, for answers, for understanding, for some sign that this wasn't all an elaborate joke that would end with her humiliation. "You barely touched dinner last night either." He set down his teacup and leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her squirm. "Are you afraid the food is poisoned?" "No!" The response was immediate, horrified. "I would never think, I don't—" "Ilara." His voice was patient, infinitely gentle. "Talk to me." The words came out in a rush, all the fears and confusion she had been holding inside for 3 days spilling over like water from a cracked dam. "I don't belong here. I don't understand why you're being kind to me, why you're pretending that I'm something I'm not. I'm a servant, Adrian. I empty chamber pots and scrub floors and darn stockings until my fingers bleed. I don't know how to be anything else." He was quiet for a long moment, his golden eyes never leaving her face. Then he pushed back from the table and stood, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens. The morning sun caught in his dark hair, and even in the simple shirt and breeches he wore for their private breakfast, he looked every inch the king he was. "Do you know why I never married?" he asked softly. The question caught her off guard. "Because you never found anyone suitable?" "Because I never found my mate." He turned back to her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her chest ache. "My parents had what they called a political alliance. They were cordial to each other, respectful, but there was no love between them, no passion, no connection beyond duty and bloodlines." He moved closer, coming to stand beside her chair, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "I watched them live separate lives under the same roof for 30 years, he continued. "I watched my mother wither away from loneliness, and my father grow cold and bitter from the weight of a crown that was never balanced by true partnership. And I swore that I would rather rule alone than settle for less than what my wolf recognized as home." "Your wolf!" The words came out as barely a whisper. "Wolves mate for life, Ilara. We know our other half by scent, by touch, by the way the world shifts when we find them. I have spent 15 years rejecting every suitable bride my council presented, every alliance they arranged, because none of them made my wolf rise in recognition." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with devastating tenderness. "Until you." The golden thread in her chest pulled tight, responding to his touch like a flower turning toward the sun. But fear was stronger than attraction, stronger than the impossible pull she felt toward this man who could have anyone and had chosen her. "What if you're wrong?" she whispered. "What if I'm just some poor girl you felt sorry for, and this isn't what you think it is? Then why does your scent calm my wolf when nothing else can? Why do I sleep better when I know you're safe in the rooms next to mine? Why does everything in me go quiet when you smile?" His other hand came up to frame her face, and she felt utterly surrounded by his warmth, his certainty, his impossible patience. "And why, when I'm not with you, does everything feel wrong?" She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that she could be worthy of the way he looked at her, that she could be more than the frightened girl who had spent her life invisible. But belief was a luxury she had never been able to afford. "The court hates me," she said instead. "I can see it in their faces when they look at me. They think I'm trying to seduce you for power or money or—" "The court can go to hell." The words were said so mildly that it took a moment for their meaning to register. "Their opinion matters less to me than dust." "But you're their king. Don't you have to care what they think?" "I care about their loyalty, not their gossip." He smiled, and it was sharp-edged and dangerous. "And they will give me both, because they know the alternative is far worse than accepting a queen they didn't choose." Queen. There was that word again, the one that made her heart race and her palms sweat, the one that felt like trying on clothing made for someone else entirely. "I don't know how to be a queen," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I don't know how to be a king who rules with someone he loves instead of someone he tolerates," he replied. "We'll learn together." Love. The word hung in the air between them like something precious and fragile, and Ilara felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever loved her before. Her parents had died when she was too young to remember them, and the castle staff had tolerated her presence, but never welcomed it. She was used to being useful, necessary in the way that any servant was necessary, but never wanted, never chosen. "Adrian," she whispered, and his name on her lips felt like a prayer. "Yes? I'm scared. I know." He leaned down until his forehead touched hers, until she could see every golden fleck in his amber eyes. "But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She thought of the way he had caught her when she stumbled, the way he had asked for one dance and promised her every dance. She thought of the patience in his voice when she questioned him, the gentleness in his hands when he touched her. She thought of the golden thread that connected her heart to his, pulling tight whenever he was near. "Yes," she whispered, and felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening that she hadn't even known was closed. His smile was radiant, transforming his face into something that belonged in stained glass windows and epic poems. "Then that's enough. That's everything." A knock at the study door interrupted them, sharp and insistent. Adrian straightened with a sigh, his hands falling away from her face. "Enter," he called, and the door opened to admit Lord Blackwood and Lady Cordelia Fairfax, two of the most powerful nobles in the court. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but Ilara could sense the disapproval radiating from them like heat from a forge. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood said with a bow that was precisely correct, but somehow managed to convey profound displeasure. "Forgive the interruption, but there are matters of state that require your attention." "Of course there are." Adrian's voice was dry, faintly amused. "And I'm sure they have nothing whatsoever to do with my choice of breakfast companion." "The Duke of Westmere has requested an audience," Lady Cordelia said, her pale eyes flicking to Ilara with barely concealed disdain. "As has the Marquis of Thornfield, and the Council of Lords wishes to discuss the upcoming harvest celebrations." "How fascinating!" Adrian didn't move from his position beside Ilara's chair. "And does any of this require immediate attention, or can it wait until I finish my meal?" The silence stretched taut, and Ilara felt the weight of their judgment settling on her shoulders like a physical thing. She was the intruder here, the one who didn't belong, the servant girl who had somehow wormed her way into their king's affections and disrupted the natural order of things. "Perhaps," she said quietly, rising from her chair, "I should return to my rooms, let you attend to your duties." "Sit down, Ilara." Adrian's voice carried the unmistakable weight of command, and she sank back into her chair without thinking. My duties can wait 10 minutes for me to finish my breakfast with my intended queen." The words hit the room like thunderclaps, and Ilara saw Lady Cordelia's face go white with shock. Lord Blackwood's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish pulled from water. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood managed finally, "surely you don't mean—" "I mean exactly what I said." Adrian's voice was pleasant, conversational, but there was steel beneath the silk. "Ilara will be my queen. The only question is whether the court chooses to accept this gracefully, or whether I need to remind them that my wolf is not known for his patience with those who threaten what belongs to him." The threat was unmistakable, wrapped in courtly language but clear as crystal. Ilara felt something fierce and protective stir in her chest, responding to the way he claimed her, the way he stood between her and their disapproval like a shield. "We shall inform the lords of your decision," Lady Cordelia said through gritted teeth. "I'm sure they will be surprised. I'm sure they will be." Adrian smiled, and it was all teeth. "You may go." They left with stiff bows and barely concealed outrage, and Ilara found herself alone with the man who had just publicly declared his intention to make her his queen. The man who had defended her without hesitation, who had faced down his most powerful nobles for the sake of a servant girl they all despised. "That could have gone better," she said weakly. Adrian laughed, rich and warm and utterly unrepentant. "That could have gone much worse. Trust me, love, compared to what I was expecting, that was practically a celebration." Love. He had called her love, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if she truly belonged at his side, in his life, in his heart. Maybe she didn't know how to be a queen yet. Maybe she didn't understand the politics of court or the weight of a crown. But she was beginning to understand something else, something that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. She was beginning to understand what it felt like to be chosen. The week that followed Adrian's declaration passed in a blur of hostile stares and whispered conversations that stopped abruptly whenever Ilara entered a room. The court had made their position clear without saying a word. She was an intruder, a nobody who had somehow bewitched their king, and they would tolerate her presence only as long as they absolutely had to. It was Lady Cordelia who finally gave voice to what they were all thinking. "The Council of Lords has expressed certain concerns," she said, her tone deceptively pleasant as she approached Ilara in the rose garden where she had been trying to find a moment's peace, "about your Majesty's suitability for the crown." Ilara looked up from the white roses she had been tending, a habit from her days in the kitchen gardens that she couldn't seem to break. Lady Cordelia stood before her like a pillar of ice-blue silk and barely concealed disdain, her pale eyes sharp with calculation. "I'm not sure what you mean," Ilara said carefully, though her stomach clenched with familiar dread. "Oh, I think you do." Lady Cordelia's smile was razor-thin. "You're an intelligent girl, despite your humble origins. You must realise that being chosen by the king's heart doesn't automatically qualify you to wear the crown." The words were delivered with surgical precision, designed to cut deep while maintaining the veneer of propriety. And they worked. Every insecurity Ilara had been fighting rushed back in a flood of cold certainty. She was nobody. She knew nothing about ruling, about diplomacy, about the 1,000 different ways a queen could fail her people. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "A demonstration?" Lady Cordelia's eyes glittered with malicious satisfaction. "The council wishes to test your knowledge of court protocol, noble lineages, and the diplomatic arts. Surely you wouldn't object to proving your worthiness." It was a trap. Ilara could see it clearly, could feel the jaws closing around her, even as she struggled to find a way out. But what choice did she have? If she refused, they would claim she was afraid, unprepared, exactly as unworthy as they believed. And if she accepted? When? She heard herself ask. Tomorrow evening, before the entire court. Lady Cordelia's smile widened, predatory and triumphant. "I do so hope you're prepared." The test, when it came, was everything Ilara had feared and worse. They seated her at a small table in the centre of the great hall, while the entire nobility of the realm watched from their elevated positions, like spectators at a gladiatorial combat. The questions came rapid fire from a panel of lords and ladies, each one designed to expose her ignorance. "Name the ruling families of the Eastern Duchies and their ancestral seats," demanded Lord Blackwood. "Recite the proper greeting for a visiting foreign dignitary of royal blood," ordered the Marquis of Thornfield. "Explain the treaty obligations between the Northern Realm and the Kingdom of Valdris," snapped Lady Cordelia. Ilara stumbled through what answers she could manage, her face burning with humiliation as the court murmured and whispered at every mistake. She could see Adrian in his throne at the high table, his face a mask of controlled fury, but he had agreed to let the test proceed. They both knew that if he interfered, it would only prove what the court already believed, that she was too weak to stand on her own. "And finally," Lady Cordelia said with vicious satisfaction, "please demonstrate the proper courtly bow for a subject addressing their sovereign." The final insult. They wanted to see her grovel, to watch her remember her place before them all. Ilara's hands shook as she began to rise from her chair, every eye in the hall fixed on her impending humiliation. That was when the screaming started. The great doors of the hall burst open, and a young page stumbled through, his face white with terror and his clothes torn. "Fire!" he gasped. "Fire in the east wing! The nursery! The children are trapped!" Chaos erupted. Lords and ladies surged to their feet, voices raised in alarm and confusion. But Ilara was already moving, her chair clattering to the ground behind her as she ran toward the doors. Behind her she heard Adrian's voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Clear the hall! Send for the water brigade!" But Ilara was already gone, her silk slippers sliding on the marble floors as she raced through corridors filled with smoke. The east wing housed the children of visiting nobles, a dozen young ones who had been left in the care of nurses, while their parents attended the humiliating spectacle in the great hall. The smoke was thicker here, acrid and choking, and flames licked at the walls with hungry orange tongues. Ilara could hear crying from behind a door at the end of the corridor, high and terrified, and breaking her heart with every sob. The door was locked, the key nowhere to be found. Without thinking, Ilara grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table and began battering at the door handle. The metal bent and cracked under her desperate assault, and finally the door swung open to reveal a scene from a nightmare. 6 children huddled in the corner of the smoke-filled room, their nurse unconscious on the floor beside them. The youngest couldn't have been more than 4 years old, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks as she clutched a wooden doll to her chest. "It's all right," Ilara called to them, her voice rough with smoke. "I'm going to get you out of here." She gathered the smallest children in her arms first, carrying them 2 at a time through corridors that were growing more dangerous by the moment. The older ones she led by hand, speaking to them in the same gentle voice she had once used to calm frightened animals in the castle stables. "Follow me closely. Don't let go of my hand. We're going to be safe." It was on her 3rd trip that the ceiling beam gave way. Ilara heard the crack and looked up just in time to see the massive wooden beam breaking free from its supports, tumbling toward the little girl she was carrying, Lord Blackwood's granddaughter, she realised with distant clarity. There was no time to think, no time to calculate the odds or consider the consequences. She threw herself forward, shielding the child with her body as the beam crashed down across her back and shoulders. Pain exploded through her like lightning, white-hot and devastating, and for a moment the world went black around the edges. But the little girl in her arms was crying, which meant she was alive, which meant Ilara had to keep moving. Somehow she found the strength to crawl forward, dragging them both towards safety, even as agony screamed through every nerve. Strong arms caught her just as her strength gave out, lifting both her and the child she protected. Through the haze of pain and smoke, She caught a glimpse of golden eyes blazing with fury and terror. "Elara!" Adrian's voice was rough, desperate. "What did you do? What the hell did you do?" "The children," she managed to whisper. "Are they all safe?" "They're safe. They're all safe because of you." His hands were shaking as he carried her toward the courtyard where the rest of the rescued children waited with their frantic parents. "But you! God, Elara, what were you thinking?" "Thinking?" She tried to smile and failed, tasting blood on her lips. "I wasn't thinking. They were scared." The great hall was in chaos when Adrian carried her through the doors, her blood staining his white shirt as he strode toward the high table. The assembled nobles fell silent at the sight of them, their king cradling the woman they had been humiliating just hours before, her sacrifice written in smoke and blood, and the tears streaming down her face. Lord Blackwood was the first to speak, his voice cracking with emotion as he looked at his granddaughter, alive and unharmed in her nurse's arms. "She saved them," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. "She saved them all." Adrian placed Elara gently on the dais, his hands never leaving her face as the court physician rushed forward to tend to her injuries. But his eyes were fixed on the assembled nobles, and when he spoke, his voice carried the absolute authority of an alpha who would brook no further challenge. "You wanted to test her worthiness," he said, and every word was carved from ice and fury. "You wanted to know if she had the qualifications to wear the crown. Well, here's your answer." He turned back to Elara, his hands gentle despite the rage radiating from every line of his body. "She ran into a burning building to save children who weren't hers. She risked her life for people who have shown her nothing but cruelty. She has the only qualifications that matter: courage and a heart that puts others before herself." The silence in the hall was absolute, broken only by the soft sounds of children crying for their parents and the whispered prayers of nobles who had come far too close to losing what mattered most. "Anyone," Adrian continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall, "anyone who questions her worthiness again will answer to me personally, and I assure you, you will not enjoy the conversation." Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Elara heard Lord Blackwood clear his throat. When she looked toward him, the powerful lord who had questioned her so cruelly was kneeling beside the dais, his head bowed in unmistakable respect. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," he said quietly. "I was wrong. We all were." One by one, the other nobles followed suit, dropping to their knees in acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. Not because she had passed their test of protocol and bloodlines, but because she had proven something far more important. She had proven that she was willing to die for the people she would serve. "No more tests," Adrian said firmly, his golden eyes blazing as he looked out over his kneeling court. "No more questions. She is my queen, and she has earned that title in the only way that matters." As consciousness began to slip away from her, Elara felt his hand close around hers, warm and sure and absolutely unshakable. "Rest now," he whispered against her ear. "When you wake up, we'll begin planning our wedding." Elara woke to the sound of rain against tall windows and the scent of pine and snow that could only mean one thing: Adrian was near. Her back ached fiercely where the beam had struck her, but beneath the pain was something else. Something warm and golden that pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. "Finally," said a voice rough with exhaustion and relief. "You've been unconscious for 2 days." She turned her head carefully to find Adrian slouched in a chair beside the massive bed, his usually perfect appearance dishevelled. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair mussed, and there were dark circles under his golden eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and worry that ran bone deep. 2 days. Her voice came out as barely a whisper, throat raw from smoke inhalation. 2 very long days. He leaned forward, reaching for a glass of water on the bedside table. The physician said you had a concussion and severe bruising along your spine. You're lucky to be alive. The children are safe, all of them, thanks to you." He helped her sit up enough to sip the water, his touch infinitely gentle. "Lord Blackwood's granddaughter asks about you every day. She wants to bring you flowers." A warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth spread through her chest. "She's sweet. She's also the reason her grandfather has been pacing outside this door like a caged wolf, desperate to apologize properly for his behaviour." Adrian's mouth quirked in something that wasn't quite a smile. "I've never seen a proud man humble himself so thoroughly." "Adrian," she started, but he shook his head. "Before you say anything, there's something you need to know." His expression grew serious, golden eyes intense with an emotion she couldn't name. "While you were unconscious, while I was sitting here wondering if I was going to lose you before I ever truly had you, I realised something." He stood and moved to the window, his back rigid with tension. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the gardens beyond into impressionist smears of green and grey. "I've been patient," he said quietly. "I've been gentle and understanding, and everything I thought you needed me to be. But watching you lying there, seeing how close I came to losing you—" He turned back to her, and the raw need in his eyes made her breath catch. "I can't wait any more, Ilara. I won't." The intensity in his voice sent heat spiralling through her, but there was something else there too, something darker, more possessive than the careful courtesy he had shown her until now. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you nearly died saving children who aren't ours yet, and the entire time you were unconscious, my wolf was clawing at the inside of my chest because you weren't marked, you weren't claimed, you weren't permanently, irrevocably mine." He moved closer to the bed, his movements predatory and fluid. "That ends today. Adrian, they tried to kill you." The words stopped her cold. "What?" "The fire wasn't an accident." His voice was deadly calm, but she could see the fury burning beneath the surface like lava beneath rock. "Someone barred the nursery door from the outside and set the blaze deliberately. They used the children as bait, knowing you would risk yourself to save them." Horror washed over her in a cold wave. Who would do such a thing? "Lord Vane and Lady Morgana, with the backing of several minor houses who thought removing you would solve their political problems." His smile was all teeth, sharp and utterly without mercy. "They're currently residing in the dungeons while they await trial for attempted murder and treason. You could have been killed because of their ambition, because I wasn't strong enough to protect you properly." He sat on the edge of the bed, his weight making the mattress dip toward him. "That will never happen again." Something in his tone made her pulse race, a mixture of excitement and apprehension that left her breathless. "What do you mean?" "I mean that tonight, before the entire court, I'm going to mark you as mine, publicly and permanently." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her skin with devastating tenderness. "I'm going to make you my mate, my queen, my everything, and anyone who tries to hurt you again will have to go through me first." The formal claiming. She had heard whispers about the ancient ceremony, the way an alpha bound his mate to him with teeth and magic and vows that transcended death itself. It was intimate and possessive and utterly irreversible. "The court won't expect it so soon," she said weakly, though part of her, the part that had been yearning for his touch, his claim, his absolute possession, thrilled at the thought. "The court will witness what I choose to show them." His voice dropped to a rumble that vibrated through her bones. "But the real ceremony, the marking, the mating bond, that's private, that's just for us." Heat flooded her face at the implications, but beneath the embarrassment was something else. Want, need. The golden thread that connected them pulled tight, demanding completion. "Ilara," his voice was soft now, coaxing. "Look at me." She met his golden eyes and saw everything there, desire and possession, and a love so fierce it took her breath away. "I need you to say yes," he said quietly. "I need you to choose this, choose me, choose us. Because once I mark you, once the bond is complete, There's no going back. You'll be mine forever, in every way that matters. Forever. The word should have terrified her, but instead it filled her with a warmth that started in her chest and spread outward until her entire body hummed with it. Forever with this man who had seen her at her worst and called her precious. Forever with someone who would defend her against the world and trust her to defend others. Yes, she whispered, and watched his entire face transform with relief and triumph, and something so purely possessive it made her knees weak. The ceremony that evening was unlike anything the court had ever witnessed. Adrian had ordered the great hall transformed, the usual formal arrangements swept away in favour of something more primal, more ancient. Torches burned in brackets along the walls, casting dancing shadows across stone that had been carved with old symbols, moon and wolf, and the eternal knot that bound mates together. Ilara entered the hall wearing a gown of deep forest green that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, her hair loose and flowing as tradition demanded. The assembled nobles watched in awed silence as she walked toward the dais where Adrian waited, magnificent in black leather and silver, every inch the Alpha King he was born to be. "My lords and ladies," he said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the hall, "tonight you witness something that has not been seen in this realm for 300 years. Tonight I claim my mate before Moon and Pack and the old gods who watch over us all." He descended the steps to meet her in the centre of the hall, and when he took her hands in his, she felt the ancient magic stirring in the air around them, responding to their joined touch. "Do you come to me freely?" he asked, the ritual words carrying the weight of centuries. "I do," she replied, her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Do you offer yourself as mate and queen, to stand beside me in all things?" "I do." "Then by moon and blood and the bond that has called us together across time and space, I claim you as mine." He lifted his hand to her throat, fingers tracing the pulse point where her neck met her shoulder. "As you claim me as yours." The bite, when it came, was swift and sure and sent lightning racing through her veins. Not pain, but possession, claiming, the golden thread that had connected them snapping into something unbreakable and eternal. She felt his wolf rise to meet hers, felt the part of herself she had hidden for 22 years finally surge free in recognition of its mate. The court gasped as her eyes flashed gold in the torchlight, as power rippled outward from where they stood joined together. She was no longer the wolfless servant they had scorned. She was Alpha, queen, mate to the most powerful wolf in the realm. When Adrian lifted his head, his lips stained with her blood, his eyes were blazing with triumph and satisfaction and love so fierce it took her breath away. "Mine," he said, and the word echoed through the hall like a vow. "Yours," she replied, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones like coming home. The bond snapped fully into place, and suddenly she could feel everything, his emotions, his thoughts, his absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The golden thread that had connected them was now a living thing, pulsing with shared heartbeats and intertwined souls. "All hail Queen Ilara," Adrian said, turning to face the court with her hand clasped firmly in his. "Long may she reign." "Long may she reign," the court echoed, their voices raised in acknowledgement and acceptance, and something that might have been awe. As they knelt before their new queen, Ilara felt something she had never experienced before. The absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Not because of bloodline or politics or convenience, but because an Alpha had chosen her and she had chosen him in return. The rest of forever stretched out before them, golden and bright and theirs. 3 months later, Queen Ilara stood at the tall windows of her private study, watching the first snow of winter dust the castle gardens in pristine white. The mark on her throat had healed to a silvery scar that caught the light when she moved, a permanent reminder of the night everything changed. But it wasn't the physical mark that had transformed her. It was the golden bond that hummed constantly between her heart and Adrian's, a living connection that made her feel whole in ways she had never imagined possible. "Your Majesty!" came a soft voice from the doorway, and Ilara turned to find young Lady Catherine, Lord Blackwood's granddaughter, peering around the edge of the door with a shy smile. "May I come in?" "Of course, sweetheart." Ilara knelt down as the little girl ran to her, accepting the enthusiastic hug with a warmth that still surprised her sometimes. 3 months ago she had been invisible to the nobility. Now children sought her out for comfort, and adults came to her with their problems, trusting her judgment in ways that humbled her daily. "I brought you something," Catherine said importantly, producing a slightly wilted flower from behind her back. "It's from Grandfather's winter garden. He said you might like it." The flower was a delicate white rose, its petals edged with frost, but still beautiful. Ilara accepted it with the same gravity she would have shown a crown jewel. "It's perfect, thank you." "Grandfather says you're the bravest person he knows," Catherine continued, settling onto the thick rug beside Ilara's chair. "He says you saved my life." "You would have done the same thing," Ilara said gently, stroking the child's dark hair. "When people we love are in danger, we find strength we didn't know we had. Do you love me?" The innocent question hit Ilara square in the chest, filling her with an emotion so fierce and protective it took her breath away. "Very much." Catherine beamed at this, then grew serious again. "Will you teach me to be brave like you?" "You're already brave," Ilara said with absolute conviction. "But yes, I'll teach you everything I can." The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced Adrian's arrival before he appeared in the doorway, magnificent as always in his dark wool coat dusted with snow. His golden eyes found hers immediately, and she felt the bond between them pulse with warmth and love and the quiet contentment that had become their constant companion. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, though he was already moving into the room with the fluid grace that still made her pulse race. "Never," Ilara said, rising to meet him. The kiss he gave her was soft and sweet, a greeting between mates who knew they had forever ahead of them. "King Adrian!" Catherine bounced to her feet, completely unawed by the most powerful man in the realm. "Look what I brought Queen Ilara." She held up the white rose proudly, and Adrian examined it with the same serious attention he gave matters of state. "A winter rose from your grandfather's garden. That's very special, Lady Catherine. They only bloom when something magical happens." The little girl's eyes went wide. "Really? What magic happened?" Adrian's gaze found Ilara's over Catherine's head, and the look in his eyes made her heart flutter like a bird taking flight. A servant became a queen. A king learned how to love, and 2 people who were meant to be together found their way home. The simple words held so much truth that Ilara felt tears prick at her eyes. Home. That's what this was, what they had built together in the months since their mating. Not just a place, but a feeling, a certainty that she belonged exactly where she was. "Will you stay for tea?" Catherine asked hopefully. "Cook made those little cakes with the sugar flowers." "I would be honoured," Adrian said solemnly, and Ilara watched with endless fascination as the feared Alpha King settled onto the rug beside a 6-year-old girl and gravely discussed the merits of sugar flowers versus real ones. This was her life now. Moments like this, simple and precious and infinitely more valuable than any crown. She poured tea from the delicate china set that had once seemed impossibly elegant, listening to Adrian and Catherine debate whether winter roses were more beautiful than summer ones, and felt a peace settle over her that was deeper than contentment. Later, after Catherine had been collected by her nursemaid and tucked away for her afternoon nap, Ilara and Adrian walked through the castle corridors hand in hand. It was something they did every day now, A quiet patrol that let them see their people, hear their concerns, and simply be present in the lives they had sworn to protect. The servants they passed no longer looked through her as if she didn't exist. Instead, they curtsied respectfully and smiled with genuine warmth. She had learned their names, their children's names, their hopes and fears and small everyday struggles. She had instituted changes, better wages for the kitchen staff, warmer clothing allowances for those who worked outdoors, a school for the children of castle workers. Lord Pemberton is requesting an audience about the grain shipments to the eastern villages, Adrian said as they passed through the portrait gallery, and the Duke of Westmere wants to discuss trade agreements with the southern kingdoms. What about the proposal for the new orphanage? Ilara asked. It was a project close to her heart, a place where children without families could find safety and education and the kind of care she had never received. Approved and funded, construction begins in the spring. He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. You know you don't have to ask permission for every good thing you want to do, don't you? You're the Queen. If you think the realm needs orphanages and schools and better roads, then we build them. I'm still getting used to it, she admitted. 3 months ago, I needed permission to take an extra candle from stores. Now I can authorise the construction of entire buildings. You're magnificent at it, he said with absolute conviction. The people love you because you understand them, because you've lived the life they live, known the struggles they know. That's worth more than any noble bloodline. The bond between them pulsed with his sincere admiration, and Ilara felt the last of her old insecurities fade away like morning mist. She wasn't the frightened servant girl any more. She was Queen Ilara, chosen and cherished, and exactly where she belonged. That evening, the castle hosted a small celebration for the first snowfall, an old tradition that had lapsed during the previous king's reign, but that Ilara had quietly revived. The great hall was decorated with evergreen boughs and white candles, and the court had gathered not for political manoeuvring, but simply to enjoy music and dancing and the warmth of community. Ilara wore a gown of deep blue velvet that brought out the gold flecks in her eyes, and her hair was arranged in the elaborate style befitting a queen. But it was the small white rose tucked behind her ear, Catherine's gift, that made her feel most beautiful. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood approached with a deep bow that held none of the mockery she remembered from those first terrible tests. "Would you do me the honour of a dance? I believe I owe you several apologies, and they would be better delivered properly." "The apologies have already been accepted," Ilara said gently. "But I would be happy to dance with the grandfather of such a sweet little girl." As they moved through the steps of the formal waltz, Lord Blackwood spoke quietly. "I want you to know that my granddaughter talks about you constantly. You've become her hero, and I understand why. What you did that night, running into that fire, I will never forget it." "Any mother would have done the same," Ilara replied, and meant it. "But you weren't her mother. You weren't anyone's mother. You were just a woman with a heart brave enough to risk everything for children who meant nothing to you." His voice grew thick with emotion. "That's when I knew we had been fools to question your worthiness. You didn't need royal blood or perfect manners. You had something far more important." "What's that?" "A queen's heart." The words stayed with her as the evening continued, through dinner and more dancing and the easy conversations that marked a court at peace. She found herself watching the faces around her, nobles who had once scorned her now coming to her with genuine respect, servants who had worked alongside her now proud to serve under her reign, children who saw in her someone safe and kind and trustworthy. Finally, as the celebration began to wind down, the musicians struck up one last waltz. Adrian appeared at her side as if summoned, extending his hand with the same devastating smile that had stolen her breath 3 months ago. "Just one dance," she said, echoing the words that had started everything between them. "Every dance," he replied, drawing her onto the floor, "for the rest of your life." They moved together with the synchronicity of mates who knew each other's rhythm by heart, who could communicate entire conversations with a look or a touch. The court watched with the fond approval of people who had witnessed a fairy tale come to life, but Ilara was only aware of Adrian's arms around her, his golden eyes fixed on her face, the bond between them humming with love and contentment and the promise of forever. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly as they turned. "Giving up your quiet life for all of this?" She thought of her cold little room in the servants' quarters, of the endless days of invisible drudgery, of the bone-deep loneliness that had been her constant companion for 22 years. Then she looked around the hall, filled with people who valued her judgment and sought her counsel, at the man who held her like she was precious beyond measure, at the life they were building together one day at a time. "Never," she said with absolute conviction. "This is exactly where I belong. With me, with you, for every dance, every day, every moment we have." She smiled up at him, this man who had seen worth in a servant girl and called her queen. "For the rest of forever." The music swelled around them, and as they danced alone in the centre of the great hall, just as they had that first night, just as they would for countless nights to come, Ilara felt the truth of it settle into her bones. This was her happily ever after, earned not through birthright or luck, but through courage and love and the willingness to believe that sometimes fairy tales could be real. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts about these stories, and if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free and it helps more people discover these tales of love and second chances.